Hi everybody, Jim Ostrowski with a special edition, Memorial Day edition of the Liberty Moving podcast. I know things were slowing down for you on Memorial Day and you needed a little pick-me-up. So I figured I'd come in at the low spot in the day and get you taken care of. How you doing? Get you taken care of. I guess I have a fan. Oh, two fans. I'm getting famous in my old age. So first, let's adjust the camera a little bit. Yeah, we're going to talk about the MAHA report, Make America Healthy Again. Working on a book on this subject, but as you know, I'm self-funded, got no backers, rely on book sales. So as the money dribbles in, we'll get the book out. But so the book I'm writing is Voting with Your Health. And beyond that, I've been researching this. I've been involved in this health issue I started thinking about it. It's like, how long have I been writing about health-related issues? And it's really decades. My whole involvement with the war on drugs was really health-related, because the war on drugs had so many negative effects on health, including crime and overdoses and things of that nature. And that goes back to the 80s. So I've really been working on this issue since the 80s. I wrote an article called Politics and Pathogens for Lou Rockwell, which ended up in my book, Political Class Dismissed, published in 2004. So, you're talking about 20 years. So I've been thinking about these issues for a long time. So let's talk about America is let me end with the conclusion. Let me begin with the conclusion. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. I've been up early. So America is an extremely unhealthy country. It's probably the least healthy, wealthy country. I like to call it that. Statistically, probably almost exactly correct. If I'm off by a nose. So think about this. See, we've had a progressive big government since 1913, which is a radical shift in the nature of government, from basically kind of leaving you alone, bothering you way more than they should, but basically leaving you alone if you didn't make a pest out of yourself. 1913, everything changed, and ever since then, we've had this gigantic government. Gigantic. Taxing your income, inflating the money supply, conscripting you to fight and die in foreign wars. World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Massive redistribution of wealth away from you and to whoever's the favored clients of the state at any given moment. Massive regulation of the economy. Occupational licensure of doctors, licensing and regulating hospitals, licensing and regulating medical schools. The government has been massive. I haven't even begun to scratch the surface, but the government has been massively involved in your health. For well over 100 years. And why are we so unhealthy? And does the government bear any responsibility for this? And this is one of the things is missing from the report, is there's a couple references to government policy or regulatory policy. But what you got to lead off with is the big picture. Government has massively failed to improve American health. And that's going to be the message of my book. And this is completely missing. Skimmed the report. I read a lot of it. I didn't read the whole thing because time is short. But sorry. At least I've read most of it, and most commentators haven't read any of it. So in addition to the government policies that I mentioned, there's direct involvement, even more direct involvement in American health by the government, including the fact that I believe in every one of the 3,000 counties in the country, there's a health department. Every one of the 50 states, there's a health department. federal government. There's the HHS, the Department of Health, whatever the fucking name is, who cares? And yet, we have the least healthy, wealthy country. When is somebody going to admit that government trying to protect our health has been a massive fucking failure? I'm going to go further than that, though. But let's talk a little bit about the report. So, the report talks about a bunch of things. We're going to go through the main points. It's a preliminary report, and it's not over with. I'm not going to let anybody think that this is the final report, that there's nothing more to be said. It's an initial report. So I'm just criticizing the initial report. Talk about processed foods. Okay. Why is it that in the 1960s, we were eating home-cooked meals, and in the 1970s, we were not? Oversimplification, I admit, but the general trend is there. Shit started to happen, and then I'm a big believer, as turbulent as the 1960s were, it was sort of the last quasi-normal decade before the massive impact of progressive big government had built up over the decades and finally started to knock down the pillars of American society, including the nuclear family, where generally speaking there were two parents in a home. One spouse worked while the kids were young, and the other spouse stayed home. The spouse, when the kids were young, the one spouse stayed home. Usually the mother, but not always. And that suddenly changed. Now there's nobody home to cook the meals, and there's a natural tendency to eat fast food, junk food, highly processed food. Well, this change in human history from families raising their own children, often with the extended family back in the day, this didn't just suddenly happen. Nobody said, hey, in the 1960s, young mothers stayed home and took care of the kids. And when the kids got older, they often got part-time jobs, sometimes full-time jobs. But when the kids were younger, they stayed home. And that seemed to be working pretty fucking well. And nobody said, except the feminists, of course, nobody said, well, this is terrible, who were often Marxists trying to overthrow society. This isn't a podcast about feminism. And I'm not an expert on feminism. I know a little bit. I lived through it. But many of the feminists were Marxist revolutionaries, and they intentionally were bent on overthrowing bourgeois society so they could put in the socialist utopia, this nightmare that they actually did install in several countries, and it failed. But my point is, nobody really voted for this. It happened, but it was the result of the fact that over time, government gets more and more expensive. And I put out this statistic. It's a revolutionary statistic. The government steals or destroys 80% of your wealth. I've been working on this for years. I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the methodology. I don't have a PhD in statistics or economics, but I have a good sense of statistics. So I got onto artificial intelligence, Grok, asked it 30 questions and got Grok to admit, this is Grok, the smartest computer in the world, got Grok to admit that 80.7% of the income you produce is pissed away by the government one way or another. So again, a report that talks about, in the 70s and 80s, we started to rely on processed foods more and junk food, but doesn't delineate the role of big government in destroying the fucking family, where you couldn't have anybody home cooking a meal anymore, which I experienced in the 60s. The great thing about being 67 is I lived through it. I remember all of it. I don't have to look it up. I was there. I was there in the 60s. I remember the JFK assassination. So from 63 on, I was pretty much aware of what was going on. I got older. I got more shrewd and noticed more things. Certainly in the 70s, I'm a teenager and I'm aware of everything. I'm heavily involved in politics, running for office, campaigning. So believe me, folks, it's a big problem in the study. Another quick point before I forget, because I don't have any notes. Essentially, here's the notes I have for this podcast. It's on a business card. I've got like 5 words written down. People tend to rely on the government to protect their food supply. Why? The government promises to protect the food supply and make sure that our food supply is safe. But why should anybody believe them? Well, we believe them because, as you know from reading Progressivism, a primer, the bigger government gets, first of all, the role of the family shrinks. I was talking to my son about this earlier. But the bigger government gets, the more functions and tasks that the government performs, the less the individual has to perform. And therefore, you tend to get lazy. You tend not to use your faculties to the fullest extent. You basically get dumber. So people are less intelligent now as government gets bigger. I'm not going to prove that. It's proven in Progressivism, a primer, believe me. And people have a false sense of reliance on the government. I have not put an artificial ingredient in my body since the late 70s. Maybe I go into a restaurant and I try to order Whole Foods and something slips in. But, the perfect is the enemy of the good. So these are some of the problems with the report on processed food. Now, they talk about environmental chemicals. I can't comment too much. Oh, there's a deer right in front of me. Can't comment too much about it. As every libertarian is and should be, I'm an environmentalist. I like natural things. I like a clean environment. But again, who's been guarding the hen house on this? Who has been telling us, we're going to regulate everything so everything's safe and effective and, we're going to take care of any environmental poisons? The government has been. You can't rely on the government. I made this point in other podcasts. The government does about 10 different things. Basically, if you look at everything the government does, it basically redistributes wealth. And I include the military because we haven't been attacked. We haven't been invaded since 1812. So most of what the military does is basically redistribution of wealth. Because, again, the threat of a palpable invasion on a country that's surrounded by 2 oceans, Canada and Mexico, two countries that couldn't defeat the Erie County Sheriff's Department in a fight. Now, beyond the redistribution of wealth, what does government do? Well, we need the government to provide justice and dispute resolution. Well, we know how well that works. We need the government for infrastructure, police, and the army. Well, here's the bottom line with that. There's no evidence. We want the government to do those core functions. Again, the non-core functions are just the government acting like a criminal organization, redistributing wealth from one person to another. That's robbery. That's not why we need a government. We can rob people ourselves without having a fucking government. But the core functions of government, infrastructure, police, army, courts, the government doesn't even do those well. In fact, there's no reason to believe that the government does those things well. So why would we think, and then if you look at any of the other things the government is supposed to do, health and peace and harmony and making us all love each other and education of the government, it's so good at education. That's why we have a much more illiterate society than we had when the colonists were homeschooled back in the day. Jefferson read Greek and Latin, spoke Greek and Latin. He was homeschooled. So the government doesn't fulfill any of its functions well. So why would you think, my point is this, relevant to this podcast, why would you think the government is capable of doing anything to benefit our health? They don't have the skill set. Again, I use a functional analysis. Government's good at 3 things. Conquering, we know this for a fact, through observation. Conquering territory, we know the government's good at that, right? Maintaining control of the territory, in other words, driving out anybody who wants to compete with the government. Very good at that. Lincoln killed 800,000 people in the Civil War, trying to keep control over the government. And they're really good at taxing the shit out of us. We know that. These are all empirical facts. There's no evidence government's good at anything else. Government is not good at protecting your health. We need to get the government fucking out of our health. So, screen time. Again, are kids on screens too much? Sure they are. Again, most kids see their government school teacher more than they see their father. The divorce courts make sure that anytime there's a divorce, generally speaking, the mother ends up with the house, with custody, and half the dad's income. There's exceptions. Don't tell me about the exceptions. I'm talking about the general rule. Single mothers have to work. Usually both parents have to work in a working class family. So who's there monitoring the kids? Nobody's monitoring the kids. In our family, I had the kids outside playing in bad weather, good weather. I had them in every conceivable sport imaginable. But again, if both parents have to be working, or it's a single parent household, again, they're going to be on screen time. So again, a report about American health that complains about kids' screen time and doesn't talk about the role of government and fucking up the American family is total bullshit. Yeah, RFK's report is, in that sense, total bullshit. Obesity, same thing. I talked about obesity and progressivism. It's the result of a dumbing down of the population. When you don't understand what good food is, you're going to eat food that makes you feel satisfied, and you don't have the intellectual capacity to realize this is not healthy food. So you get hungry an hour later, and you have another pizza. I explained all this in Progressivism. I'm not going to go through it. That's my main book, 12,000 copies sold. You really need to read that. It's a very short read. The reviews are great on Amazon. It's a good read. Lack of exercise, same thing. Parents not around. The parents are working. And by the way, the sheer balls of the government complaining about kids lacking exercise when they're forced by law to be in a goddamn small room for 6 hours a day. Are you fucking kidding me? Government schools are bad for your kids. One of the chapters is about health. The whole book is about health. So that's bullshit. And over-medicalization, of course. Well, we'll close on this. I didn't intend to do a long diatribe here because this is such low-hanging fruit. The report is bullshit because it doesn't talk about the contribution of progressive big government as a leading threat to the health of Americans. Government is the leading threat to your health. I've talked about this ad nauseum. I'm not going to go through all the details here. Over-medicalization. Okay, well, again, you put boys particularly in these horrible government schools where they don't want to be there. They act out. They're bullied by their peers because the peers don't want to be there anyway. If you know anything about bullying, you know anything about camera angles. Sorry. If you know anything about bullying, the bully is somebody who's bullied upstairs but can't retaliate because they can't retaliate against people who are more powerful than them. The bullying always goes downward towards the weaker party. So again, over-medicalization, it's talked about in government schools are bad for your kid. Why do I have to reinvent the fucking wheel, folks? 2009. This was ignored by the libertarians, except for a few months on Lew Rockwell, ignored by the Tea Party people, and here we are. I think everybody now realizes that what I said in 2009 is true. We found that out during the lockdown. So the main problem, I'll close on this. We're going to talk about this a lot more because I'm writing a book on it. Here's the summary. The government is the biggest threat to your health in many, many different ways. And a report that talks about why are young people, why is American health declining, particularly among young people, that almost completely ignores the role of the government particularly the role of the government post 1960s, is a completely flawed report. So I'm going to be watching this movement. I would love to work with RFK Jr. I don't know anybody who knows him. If anybody wants to hook me up with him, I'd be happy to work with him. He seems like a reasonable guy. I like the guy. I saw him speak in Buffalo. But I'm going to be honest about this report. It's not a very good report without factoring in the scientific empirical fact that the number one threat to the health of Americans is the big government, for many reasons, including which they take 80% of your income. And that has a negative impact on every other aspect of your life. So coming up on a loud music party here, I'm going to close on that. From Shoshone Park, and again, content you don't get anywhere else on the internet. The Liberty Moving Podcast. Have a good rest of your holiday, everybody.